ॐ भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Namaskar, my dear friend. This is video number 18 on Panchadasi of Swami Vidyarnaya. This video starts with part 4 of chapter 11, Residual Impressions of Bliss. Through an analysis of the state of sleep, we found that there is every kind of evidence for the experience of Brahma bliss. We shall now point out how the residual impressions of bliss experienced during the state of waking serve as a ground for asserting the existence of Brahma bliss. The Vidyarnaya self, which is the agent in the state of waking, experiences both pleasure and pain, as also the balanced state where there is neither pleasure nor pain. The experience of pleasure and pain is the product of karma, while the state of indifference expresses the innate nature of the self in the enjoyment of external objects. And in daydreams, there is the experience of pleasure and pain, and in the intervals between pleasures and pains, there is the experience of the state of silence, which is the expression of the real nature of the supreme bliss. In those moments of carefree indifference, man very often say we are free from anxieties and worries, we are happy. It must be noted, however, that even these moments do not directly manifest Brahma bliss, for what we have is only the residual impression of that supreme bliss. The direct manifestation of bliss is made impossible because it is obscured by egoity. Coolness is felt on the outer surface of a pot containing cold water, but that coolness itself is not water. In the same manner, during moments of indifference and silence, there is the experience only of the residual impressions of bliss. But just as coolness on the surface is the basis for inferring water inside the pot, even so the residual impression is the indicator of the existence of Brahma bliss. And when, through constant effort, egoity is gradually quelled, the real nature of bliss is revealed in increasing degrees. The intellect becomes refined and culminates in the destruction of all modes of the form of the not-self, and then there arises the cognition I in the internal organ which has become of the form of Brahma. This subtle state of intellect is not sleep, since there is not here the dissolution of the intellect. That Brahma bliss is manifest in this state which is distinct from sleep, and wherein there is cognition of duality, is taught by Krishna to Arjuna. Part 5 of chapter number 5, chapter number 11, Method of Yoga. The method by which the intellect is to be refined so that the supreme bliss may be attained is described in the Gita as yoga. Yoga is separation from contact with pain. It is to be achieved by constant and slow practice with a determined and untiring mind. Whatever drags the mind to the objects of sense and makes it waver and wander away should be regarded as an obstacle to the progress of a yogi. Renouncing all desires and restraining with his mind all his senses, the yogin should gain tranquility and with a steady and steadfast purpose concentrate his mind on the Supreme Self. When thus the mind is restrained and withheld from sense objects, and the intellect is refined and tranquility reached, the yogi experiences unexcellable bliss which is supersensible and grasped only by the intellect. The same method of tranquilizing the mind is taught in the Maitrayani Sakha by sage Sankhyana to King Brihadartha. Whatever the mind thinks that it becomes when it is attached to the senses and the objects thereof, it gets muddled and mutilated, but when it is concentrated on Brahma, it becomes of that form. That mind is impure, which is in contact with desires, and that mind is pure, which is completely free from the pestilence of desires, etc. Mind alone is the cause of the bondage and release of man. Attachment to objects bring about bondage, while detachment from them effects release. The mind is to be purified and tranquilized by constant and vigilant practice, just as the fire which is unfed by fuel cools down. Even so, when all the mental modes are destroyed, the mind gets dissolved in its source. When the channel of the mental flow is turned away from the objects of sense and directed towards Brahma, and when the mind gets attached thereto, then the bonds of samsara break. Rid of its impurities through some samadhi, the mind experiences unacceptable bliss which defies all description and which is grasped by the tranquil mind alone. The mental equanimity cannot be maintained for long. Samadhi does not stay for a long time, but still it gives the yogi a lasting taste of the supreme bliss. Even when he is out of that balanced state of mind, he thinks longingly of that bliss with the same ardor and intense fervor with which a woman contemplates the Lord of her heart. In the moments of indifference, when there is manifest the residual impression of bliss, he discerns the supreme bliss itself and concentrates his mind thereon. That the yogi is able to fix his mind on Brahma and at the same time carry on the activities of the world can be illustrated by examples. The crow, which is said to see with only one eye, directs its vision alternately through the two cavities. A man who is a master of two languages discerns meaning in both of them. One who stands in a river half immersed with the scorching sun above experiences both the pleasure afforded by the cool waters and the pain inflicted by the piercing shafts of the sun. In the same manner, the yogi is able to bear the miseries of the world and yet at the same time centers his mind in Brahma. Thus, unlike the ordinary run of mankind, which experiences Brahma bliss only in sleep, the yogin perceives it even in the hours of waking and dream. To the yogic perception, Brahman bliss is revealed. The method of yoga has been detailed in the concluding verses of this chapter as the means by which Brahma bliss can be attained. Yoga is the method by which the mental current is arrested in its flow towards objects of sense and directed towards Brahma. Yoga, in short, is the concentration and the tranquilizing of the mind. This method was explained in greater detail in the Dhyana Deepa, where a secondary place was assigned to it, priority being given to the method of inquiry jnana. The author of the Panchadasi does not go to the extent of saying with Vachaspati that it is only through Parshankyana that Parshankyana that Brahma intuition is gained. Though following the Vidyarnaya, he maintains that Sarvana is the principal means to Brahma knowledge. He concedes to mental concentration the position of being an auxiliary thereto, but he is firm on this point that knowledge is the only direct means to release and that there can be no combination of knowledge and karma. The Svetasvara Upanishad says, knowing that he crosses death, there is no other path to release. There are some passages of scripture and traditional code which seems to enjoin both karma or the combination of karma and jnana to be the means. Doing karma here in this world, let him desire for living 100 years. To you who desire thus, there is no other way except that by which you will not be affected by karma. He who knows both Vidya and Avidya transcends death through Avidya and attains immortality through Vidya. Through karma alone did Janka and others attain samsiddhi, like the honey which is mixed with food or the food which is mixed with honey. Tapas and Vidya together constitute a potent medicine. These texts, though they seem to enjoin either karma or a combination of karma with jnana, are not really in conflict with those passages of the Shruti which declare that there is no other path except knowledge. The word samsiddhi connotes the purification of mind which is auxiliary to Brahma knowledge. The word vidya, which is used in combination with the word avidya or karma, means upasana and not knowledge. Thus, it will be clear that none of the above quoted passages prescribes karma to be the means, either alone or in the combination with knowledge. There is evidence in abundance in the Upanishads for knowledge being the only direct means to release. The Taittiriya Upanishad says the knower of Brahma attains the highest. In the Chandogya Upanishad, Narada asks Sanat Kumara, I have heard from men like you that the knower of the self crosses sorrow, and I, who am I versed in the scriptures because of the lack of that knowledge, am in distress. Therefore, O Lord, enable me to cross the bounds of sorrow. Gods like Indra, Varuna, Yama, and Agni are said to be in constant fear of the Supreme because they are lacking in Brahma knowledge. Wherever there is duality, there is fear. He who knows Brahma, which is bliss, is never afraid. The jnani is not affected by karma in the form of merit and demerit. When the Most High is seen, the knots of his heart are cut, all doubts are dispelled, and all karmas are destroyed. Chapter 12 Self Bliss Atmanan Parkarna. For the sake of those dull witted persons who are not able to grasp the manifestation of Brahma bliss, in the in the experience of sleep and the persistence of its residual impression in moments of calmness. Another mode of conveying the bliss nature of the self is set forth in this chapter. This method, however, will prove helpful only to those of the dull-witted who are desirous of knowing Brahma. For the others, either karma or upasana is prescribed, the way of knowledge not being open to them. Part 1 Self, the seat of love, evidence of scripture. The method which the present chapter adopts is the one which Yajnavalkya had recourse to while instructing his younger wife Maitreyi. As Sankara in his commentary on the Vidyarnaya observes, in order to teach that non-attachment is instrumental to immortality, he Yajnavalkya creates a distaste for wife, husband, sons, etc., so that they may be renounced. Yajnavalkya does this by declaring that the self alone is the seat of supreme love. The love that one bears to other objects is not really for their sake, but it is for the sake of the one who loves. This self is dearer than a son, dearer than wealth, dearer than everything else, and is innermost. The love for other objects is secondary, since they contribute to the pleasure of the self, and the love for the self alone is primary. Husband, wife, progeny, wealth, cattle, caste, the world's gods, the Vedas, elements, and all the rest have no intrinsic value in themselves. They are dear for the sake of the self. Not for the sake of the husband is the husband dear, but for the sake of the self is the husband dear. A woman loves her husband only when she likes him, and that too for her own pleasure. For the husband, the object of her absolute love, she ought not at any time and under any circumstance be displeased with him, but it is a matter of common knowledge that couples fall out with each other not infrequently over trifling and trivial things. Not for the sake of the wife is the wife dear, but for the sake of the self is the wife dear. Even when husband and wife are attracted towards each other at the same time, each loves the other for his or her own sake. Similar is the case with the love that one bears towards one's children, not for the sake of the sons or the sons dear, but for the sake of the self or the sons dear. Sometimes a child may cry when fondled by its parents, but the parent thrives pleasure and does not weep with the child. This shows clearly that he loves the child for his own pleasure and not for the sake of the child itself. If this be the case with beings which are endowed with intelligence, need it then be said that inert things like wealth, caste, and the worlds and the lower animals like cattle, etc., are loved not for their own sake but for the sake of the self. Not for the sake of wealth is wealth dear, but for the sake of the self is wealth dear. Not for the sake of Brahminhood is Brahminhood dear, but for the sake of the self is Brahmanhood dear. Not for the sake of Kshatriyahood is Kshatriyahood dear, but for the sake of the self is its dear. It is not for the sake of the world that they are dear, but for the sake of the self that they are dear. The gods like Vishnu are worshipped not without any ulterior motive. The devotee worships them for the removal of his sins and not for the sake of the gods themselves who are devoid of sin. Not for the sake of the gods are the gods dear, but for the sake of the self are gods dear. The Brahmins study the Vedas in order to preserve their Brahminhood. The members of the three higher castes take to Vedic study so that they may not become outcast. Hence, even the study of the Veda is not intrinsic. Not for the sake of the Vedas are the Vedas dear, but for the sake of the self are the Vedas dear. In short, everything subserves the purpose of the self. The self is the center and the seat of love. Now, what is this love which is said to be for the sake of one's own self? It may be attachment, faith, devotion, or desire. There is attachment to objects like women. There is faith in such rites and rituals as the sacrifices. There is devotion to the preceptor, the deity, and the elders, and there is desire for things which we long to have. But all these four forms of love are not found for one and the same object. Hence, love as such cannot have everything for its object. If love be regarded as devotion, then as there is no devotion to one's wife, it would result that there is no love for her. Thus it is with love taken in any of its forms. If thus it be said, we reply that the statement would be true only when love is understood in the above manner. In all the varied manifestations of love, there is constant character which does not change. That mode of the mind is called love, which has for its object pure pleasure or happiness. It cannot be said that this love is identical with desire, for unlike the latter, it is observed to have for its object those things which have perished as well as those which are procured. For may it be said that since love is seen for food, etc., which are the instruments of happiness, there may be love for the self, not because it is an end in itself, but because it is also a means of happiness for the inference. The self is fit to be a means to happiness because it is dear, like food, etc., is conditioned by an adjunct. Food, etc., possess the characteristic of being enjoyed. Bhogayavata. But the self is not what is enjoyed, it is the enjoyer, the subject of all experience. And to say that the self is its own object is a contradiction, for one and the same thing cannot be at the same time both the helper and the helped, the subject and the object. The happiness that is dependent on external objects excites mere love of a very low degree, but the self is the most lovable, the locus of supreme happiness. The happiness that is got from the objects of sense is not constant, whereas the happiness that is centered in the self is ever present without any inconstancy. When a person gets disgusted with a particular object which for some time has given him pleasure, he puts it by and takes to another object in the hope of finding happiness there. Thus, the pleasure which the objects yield is not constant. That the self is the seat of supreme love is shown by the fact that never does a person get a desire to destroy or relinquish the self. The self can neither be abandoned nor be accepted, neither be renounced nor be received. It cannot be said that because the self can neither be abandoned nor be accepted, there can be only indifference in respect thereof. For even if there were indifference, since the self is the subject, which has that indifference, it cannot be itself the object of indifference, nor may it be said that since when a man gets disgusted with himself owing to excessive attachment or aversion, he desired to put an end to his life. What was said before, that nobody desires to destroy the self, is wrong. For what the man who is tired of his life wants to do is to destroy his body, and the body verily is not the self. The jiva, which desires to abandon its body, is not the object of disgust. It is the body that is sought to be destroyed and not the self. We have seen above the evidence of scripture for the fact that the self is the locus of absolute and unconditioned love. It is possible to arrive at the same conclusion through reasoning. In the world, it is observed that a parent, Vishnu Datta, loves his son Devdatta more than his son's friend Yajnadatta. His son is dearer to him than his son's friend who is remote in regard to relationship. Similarly, since the self is dearer than all other things, it is the locus of supreme love. Further, the experience of the desire, let me not go out of existence, let me live forever, proves that the love for the self is direct, immediate, and unconditioned. Thus, it is established from scriptural statements, reasoning, and the evidence of experience that the self is the source of happiness and the locus of love. I conclude this video here. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, and share the video. Subscribe the channel. Thanks a lot. Next video number 19 will start with part 2 of chapter number 12, Three Notions of Selfhood. Thanks you. Thank you. Namaskar.